Okay, are we ready? Of course we're ready. So that's running, and that's running, hopefully. Okay, welcome students. Welcome digital students. So the first thing we're going to discuss is Surveillance Capitalism by Shoshana Zuboff, Professor Emerita at Harvard Business School. A very lovely lady, a very important intellectual voice that you should be aware of. For lots of reasons. The most important being, I think part of being in the 21st century, especially if you're a millennial or Generation Z person, is really kind of low-key obsessing over climate change and thinking, my God, is the world coming to an end? And that is certainly an incredibly important set of problems to discuss. And last week we went through that, and that's very important stuff to think about. But arguably what comes before that crisis, and actually something that's much more important in the sense that if we don't solve the crisis expressed by Shoshana Zuboff, then frankly we stand no chance when it comes to climate change. So as we look to the digital horizon in the 21st century, Shoshana Zuboff's basic question is, does humanity have a future there? And if it has a future there, what the hell does this future look like exactly? She's deeply concerned about young people in terms of their ability to find jobs. She's deeply concerned about how these young people will relate to one another as human beings. Think, for example, of how most of our relations are digitally based, right? That's a very different reality than the one that she grew up in. So her basic questions are, what does the future look like, this digital future, with humans in it? And what can we do to make sure that we hold on to the human part that is valuable and beautiful, that we currently most likely take for granted? Okay? So understand that she as a thinker is basically interested in that question. And she's trying to address it through a number of books. Her latest book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, looks at a structural problem. And as you rightly indicate, Arthas, when we think of capitalism, and actually if you look at human history, if we look at any economic system, every economic system has a beginning, middle, and an end. There's a kind of a progression. Capitalism has gone through many iterations. The four that are mentioned by Zuboff in this Project Syndicate article are, for the purposes of your notes, industrial capitalism in chronological order, managerial capitalism, which is a late 20th century idea, the financial capitalism, which is what led to the crash associated with 2008, and of course, the latest iteration of capitalism called surveillance capitalism. In general, people talk about capitalism nowadays in academic circles using the term late capitalism. And surveillance capitalism is what we have been born into, what we're locked inside of. Zuboff's suggestion is that this reality, this economic reality, permeates every part of your life, and the irony is that very few people are aware of what surveillance capitalism is, how it works, and why we are threatened by certain aspects of surveillance capitalism. So her book, basically, is an attempt to shed light on the economic structure that we have been born into, and to identify the risks and the threats that structure imposes on us without actually our knowledge. So how is this an expression of surveillance capitalism? Well, think of it in terms of two points of view. Okay, there is a top and there's a bottom point of view. From the top, on the surface, when we look at this from the perspective of surveillance capitalism, as Celine rightfully indicates, you think you're playing a game and using an app, but the app is actually using you, and it's playing a game with you. The game has an outcome, and the outcome is that businesses who have bought in to how this game is used under surveillance capitalism get a benefit. They get traffic to their business, to their restaurant. So the game is actually hurting you to spend money. That's on the surface. Okay, so you think you're playing a game, Luis, but really what you're doing is, as you say, someone who's lethargic, sits around all day, is actually forced to come out of their house and not just walk around, but spend money. So that's on the surface. That you could see, and that's disturbing, but maybe you sort of anticipate that something like that's possible. The real surveillance capitalism is not on the surface, it's beneath the surface. From the inside, what's happening, as Arthas indicates, is behavioral modification. Every single one of these people is being engineered, slowly but surely, toward a guaranteed outcome, a guaranteed result. If we lift the curtain even further, as Zuboff does in her book, and a little bit in this article, what we realize is that, and please have this in your notes so that we're crystal clear. If we look at the 20th century, okay, and we look at managerial and financial capitalism, and even if we look further back to industrial capitalism in the 19th and 18th centuries, what we have there are a mode of capitalism that essentially exploits nature, right? As we extract from the natural resources of the earth, we feed capitalism and growth, economic growth. So economic growth, this is not a surprise, comes at a massive consequence, namely the unsustainable use of the Earth's finite resources. Last week, we mentioned a statistic from the Global Footprint Network. As of July 29th, from July 29th up until December 31st, every single day, we are eating more of the planet than the planet has to offer and can sustain. From the 29th of July of this year until the end of the year, every single day we're eating more Earth than we have. How is this possible? Well, that's one of the consequences of capitalism, right? So in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, capitalism runs feeding off of nature, effectively, extracting from nature. Surveillance capitalism is actually not about nature. It's not extracting from nature. It's extracting from human nature, for the purposes of your notes. So traditional capitalism, the resource is nature. Surveillance capitalism, the resource is human nature. And Pokemon Go is your case in point. The raw material for capitalism in the context of industrial, managerial, and financial, although managerial and financial things get a little spicy, but let's say, for the sake of argument and simplicity, the raw material is not merely nature, but to be more precise, it's fossil fuels, it's oil, right? That's what runs the whole show. Under surveillance capitalism, the raw material is your lived experience, which is captured in data points. That's what makes the whole machine work. And it's been running approximately since 2001. Google essentially exploits an opportunity, a moment in time. The laws are wobbly. Surveillance is allowed after the World Trade Center attacks, because to prevent terrorism, we're going to spy on people. And Google sees this as an opportunity also to make money. So while all the stuff about the war on terror is being discussed in the media, low-key, surveillance is becoming normalized. And Google sees an opportunity to make money. Okay? So what Google does is it starts to use surveillance to its advantage. They capture basically three elements. The first is the volume and the quantity of data. So in order for surveillance capitalism to work, you have to have a lot of data, and you have to extract a lot of data. Since there's no law stopping Google from taking your data, they're taking your data. And they're doing so with every app that you install on your phone. Okay? So when you install an app, particularly if it's a free app, there is no free app. If it's free, you're the product, hey? So once you get your free app, kids, prepare to deposit your lived experience into the coffers of Google. So first they need a bunch of data. So they collect that. They also need a variety of different types of data about you. So they're going to take GPS coordinates, they're going to take credit scores, they're going to take all of your contacts, they're going to take, you name it, they take it. All of those are ways of capturing ever more and ever more variety of your lived experience, because that's the new fossil fuel. Now comes the kicker, the third element. Surveillance capitalism is about guaranteed outcomes. It's about getting you to do something, having extracted all that data. And on the surface, as we say, it's about getting you to buy something. So here's the deal, Luis. Let's say you have a phone, you paid a bunch of money to get it, okay? You now have it. So you've deposited, let's say, $1,000 into Apple Corporation. You now download a whole bunch of free apps, okay? And now every one of those apps is taking your lived experience. Now, how are they getting away with this? First of all, there's no law that stops them from stealing it. That's the first thing to say. But the second thing to say is you've tacitly agreed to it with every software update of every app and of your phone itself. So once you say agree and you click, what you're basically saying is take me, take my smile, take my friends, take my GPS, take my everything. Now comes the kicker. You've already given them $1,000, right? You are now going to be making them money for as long as you're using that device and their apps. How? Well, when they take your lived experience, what they're going to do, and this is what Google effectively, this is how they make money. That's where most of the money has been made during COVID-19, just so you understand, okay? Surveillance capitalism. What they're doing is they're computing that data and creating what's called a predictive product, and then trading that on a human futures market, okay? So they've computed your lived experience, and your lived experience, and your lived experience, and your lived experience, and my lived experience, and your lived experience, and they've made this little product, think Pokemon Go, which they will offer to businesses and business clients who will happily buy it from Google because it'll lead to more traffic to their product or service. That's surveillance capitalism. Surveillance capitalism is stealing your lived experience, transforming it into a predictive product, and then selling it to another business. So you gave them $1,000. You have also given them a raw resource, which allows them to make even more money. And without any of your knowledge, they're not using your data and giving you a slice. They're taking your data, stealing it, and then making more money off of your lived experience. Not once, but as long as you live and as long as you have their device. And as long as you're using their apps, you're making them money. That's what you've been born into. And the shocking part is that almost no one realizes what the hell is going on. People are vaguely creeped out by the idea of a loss of privacy, but they have no idea exactly how they're being exploited. So in the time of Karl Marx, he was talking about the alienation of labor. Emma and Coral, you're watching this. He was talking about division of labor, inequality, income inequality, these types of issues. The kind of inequality that surveillance capitalism operates inside of is unprecedented. Unprecedented. We have never seen anything like this. And this is why I say that surveillance capitalism is a far more important crisis and issue to address and to fight than climate change. The two are connected. But if you don't address surveillance capitalism, if you don't wake up and lift the veil on how exploitation works in the 21st century, you basically preclude the possibility of being an agent of change in any way at all. Why is this? Because it's not just about getting you to spend money on products. That's on the surface. The real cancer, if I may use the expression, sorry about that, the real cancer is behavioral modification. We are now working away ever more efficiently and ever more elegantly at changing who you are, how you think, what you feel, how you love, basically everything that a human can do when it comes to decide on how to live their life is now potentially engineered. In other words, no privacy, no agency. And that's why I say it's not that it's more important than climate change, it just comes before climate change. If you have no privacy and you have no agency, forget about being an agent of change. Let's move forward. A couple things to say about Shoshana. Buddy, hold it. Get out of here. It's in the recording. First thing to understand, and please take note of this, Shoshana Zuboff is not anti-technology. Properly understood, what she is anti-unregulated capitalism. Please put it in the notes. So she's not anti-technology, she's anti-unregulated capitalism. In other words, what she's against is the idea of allowing Google Corporation and Apple Corporation and Huawei Corporation and you name it to behave without boundaries, without morally imposed limits. The reason why, Oscar, Google Corporation is able to extract your lived experience is because, frankly, there's nobody to stop them from stealing it. There's no law that's preventing. Who writes the law in a democracy, Oscar? The people, the demos, supposedly. But the demos is distracted. They're worried about either a massive debt or they're dreaming about a consumer product. Part of this is already engineered, by the way. We've been in surveillance capitalism since 2001. But the reason why they're able to take it is because there's no one to stop them. There's no regulation. Second point, Zuboff is not directly advocating an ideology, and you should understand this. People use her ideologically. But, already this Marx idea, and you start thinking of her a certain way. You see her in Project Syndicate. Is she a globalist? People use her ideologically, but I believe she herself is not ideological. I think she is mainly concerned with a very specific question, the one I referenced earlier, namely, is there a future for humanity at the digital horizon? I think that's honestly what she cares about most. And frankly, that's what I care about very deeply as well. And if you're a Generation Z or a millennial, you should be obsessed with that question. What future is in store for humanity at the digital horizon? Zuboff is a warrior for human dignity, and I've said this many times. Please rise to the challenge of being a warrior for human dignity. These are the people that we need. With all due respect to Greta Thunberg, she now is a pawn in other people's games. Don't be Greta. Be Shoshana. That's my suggestion to you. Okay? Be a Lewis Lapham. Be a Sylvia Earle. More on that later. So she's basically fighting for one thing, students. She's fighting for your ability to have a sanctuary from corporations. And Fiona, let me explain what that means. Basically, what she's fighting for is that space in your head where you could kind of talk to yourself, if you know what I mean. You know, that quiet place where you kind of reflect and make decisions about your life. It's that little chamber in your head that is something we all take for granted. And under surveillance capitalism, it's precisely that little place that the companies want to. Luis, I'll give you a quick sports analogy. It's a bit like this. Before you, all the high-level athletes, they have routines. But one thing that's important, whether we're talking about a combat sport or we're talking about any sport really, like before you get into the big game, most of the legends, they sort of go inward and they have a dialogue within themselves of what they're going to do, how they're going to be, how they're going to feel. They're going to visualize. That space, that private space, is what surveillance capitalism is trying to take from you. Not trying, succeeding in taking from you. And when that goes, you can't make your own decision because you don't have anywhere to make that decision in. Do you understand it? So that's what's at stake under surveillance capitalism. Why am I bringing all this up? Part of it is because I want to lift the veil, much like Shoshana Zuboff. But what I really want you to do is realize where the battle is in the 21st century. And that battle is everyone's battle. If you're alive and you're not fighting that, believe me, you're going to be a casualty in the war. You have to pick your battles, students. And surveillance capitalism and that space that you have where you make your own decision is a space that you have to protect. So she's basically fighting for a right to sanctuary from, effectively from corporations. Zubov's claim is that surveillance capitalism is unprecedented. And let me really stress this, because yesterday we touched on it, but I'm not sure if you fully absorbed it. There is an analogy. Luis, I think you'll enjoy this one. I mean that sarcastically. I don't think you're going to enjoy it, but you'll feel it. Think, for example, of the way in which Europeans came to the New World, into Latin America, into the Caribbean. The native people, this is from Shoshana Zuboff, when they saw the first sort of batch of the conquistadors, welcomed them with open arms. They saw them as the gods visiting. In other words, they are looking at an unprecedented moment, but the mistake that they make is that they think that this thing that they're looking at is a logical extension of their own past. It is not. And the price they paid was genocide, cultural and literal genocide. That's effectively the story of the New World. But if we don't learn the lesson, and it seems that we haven't, and we approach surveillance capitalism, which is the new conquistador, by the way, with the same naive belief that this is just another expression of capitalism and it's connected to the past, and if we don't recognize it as unprecedented, we risk the same fate as the native people in North and South America. How is it unprecedented? Well, first, you have to realize that when we're talking about surveillance capitalism, we're talking about asymmetries in knowledge and power that have, your brain can't even compute it. Fiona, imagine this. You spend your whole life trying to figure out who you are, right? You go through relationships, you talk to parents, you study like psychology, and you think you journal every day. You think yourself, I know who I am. No, you don't. Maybe you know who you are, but not like your machines know you. Your gadgets know you. Your phone knows you, Fiona, in a way already that you will never be able to know. And I gave you examples of this, Celine and Arthas, last day, when we were thinking about memory, right? So you think back, or this experience, and I suggested, have you had this experience? You said yes. Sometimes let's say you have a shitty relationship, Luis, okay? But when you look back on it, you remember just the good parts. Have you had this experience? So if you had that experience, that's the problem with human memory. It's selective, right? We reinterpret it. We emphasize parts and forget other parts. So Fiona, to get back to you, let's say you're trying to get to know yourself. No matter how hard you try, you're like the hardware, right? The biological coconut up there has limits. And memory is one of the places where that shines through. Why is it that your memory sucks and my memory sucks and this computer can destroy me when it comes to memory? Well, the argument is back to biology for Celine. Biology, right, Celine? Not chemistry, biology. Back to biology. Maybe it serves an evolutionary purpose, right? Like your outlook, the optimistic outlook that Celine, you expressed earlier, and I share in, I think we all share in it to an extent, but I don't know if we even choose it. It could be biology. It could be, it's easier to survive as a species if we think that things are going to get better or that we see the good part of what's happening. So that optimism and that selective memory that maybe omits or represses painful things has a function when it comes to our species. But it may be the case that, it is the case that it results in poor memory. The computer doesn't have that problem. I don't know if you've had this experience. Recently, I was story time. Recently, I was for some reason, I have no idea how this happened, but anyways, I stumbled into this email that I wrote to this girl like years ago, and it was the most strange feeling because I'm like, wait a minute. First of all, I had completely forgotten about that whole relationship and anything that had happened, but the computer didn't, Google didn't, Gmail didn't. Everything is in there. And I read it back, of course, because you're like, what was I thinking at that time? And I think it's a good illustration of the difference between how you work and how the computer works, okay? This thing is unprecedented, mate. Unprecedented in the sense that it creates asymmetries of knowledge that you can't compute, if that makes sense. And the moment that as we are about to make that turn, and I see some of you are wearing Apple Watches, interesting. As a stick to the old school, as you start feeding your devices biometric data, your device knows you in a way that for sure you will never know yourself, and you'll never be able to catch up. And what you've done is you've made yourself infinitely behaviorally modifiable. Have a think. Have a think about your purchases. Have a think about how you're relating to technology. I'm not saying don't buy Apple Watches. Corporate sponsors were waiting. What I'm saying is know what you're buying and know how you're using your data and know what you're clicking. If you don't engage in that battle, forget about climate change. And I don't want you to forget about climate change. If you know me, you know that that's one of the things that I like bang the drum about constantly. But to be honest with you, a lot of it is wasted motion if you don't engage in the battle that Shoshana Zuboff, this beautiful warrior of human dignity, is engaging in and asking you to engage in. So the first thing is you got to know where the battle is. And the next thing is you got to fight for yourself to have a little space in your coconut where you can make your own decision. I'm a big advocate of, I don't know if I'm a big advocate of it, but I think meditation's a good idea. I don't do it enough, to be honest, but I have my own way of doing it. So yeah, yoga, meditation, these things, they're ancient for a reason. Like you don't do something for 15,000 years unless there's something in it that matters to humans. And take time in your day to have that little space for yourself. I really encourage you to do so. Light a candle. Maybe Blue Mountain Winery, you're watching this? Like, corporate sponsors are waiting. Anyways, enough, sorry. We keep going. Right. If the 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries were about extracting the resources of nature, then this is about extracting human nature. Now you see the juice. Just as our boundless appetite for growth has resulted in a suicidal relation to the biosphere, because that's the only way you can describe what we've done to the planet. It's a suicide mission that we've decided to go on with the living world. So too the appetite that was boundless and ate the planet, should it continue, will result in an assault on human nature itself. So, you look at how the oceans are dying, and we looked at Sylvia Earle yesterday. If you're disturbed by this, as I hope many of you are, and here we have someone who loves the ocean in a unique way, and I'm happy to talk about that and we can share that. But if you love the ocean, and you gotta be heartbroken by what's happening with it, understand that same heartbreak is only gonna expand in magnitude because it will now be human nature itself that is under the same type of an assault, and it starts from the same place. This boundless appetite for growth. So again, Shoshana Zuboff is not anti-technology, she's anti-unregulated capitalism. She's basically saying that what we need to do is make sure that we hold companies accountable through regulations so that they don't steal our lived experience. So, Oscar, do you open your phone with your face? Luis, do you open your phone with your face? Fiona, do you open your phone with your face? Emma, Coral, Brandon, Owen, Mesa, friend. Do you open your phone with your face? Arthas? Yes? Celine? Yes. I do as well. Let's talk about that. Okay. How many times a day do you think you open your phone with your face? Let's have some numbers. We'll have a little fun. Arthas, how many times would you say? You could probably like figure that out using your Apple device, but 70 you say 70, 80 you say. Fiona's like 205. No, I'm joking. Luis? 30 you say. Fiona, I have a younger sister and I'm like notorious for teasing her. Younger sister, are you watching this? Of course you are. Sometimes not. Oscar? So you say 30, you say 200? Oh, sorry. 2,000, perfect.
I'll go on hundreds.
100, perfect. I have no idea how many times I open it, but probably a lot. So we don't think about it, right? That's the point. It's an asymmetry problem, and it's an unprecedented thing. Every time you open your face, good one, open the phone with your face, when you open your phone with your face, what you're doing is the phone is actually taking a snapshot of you, and that snapshot is stored. Here's the thing. Artists, for as long as human civilization has existed, have looked to faces and hands as the most potent expressions of emotion. And it turns out we have, I don't know exactly how many, but hundreds of muscles in our face. And our face tells an emotional story, if that makes sense. Luis, have you had this thing happen to you before where you look at your girlfriend's face, for example? Forget girlfriends, your mom's face, okay? Your mom's face, and let's say you're in a crowd of people and like everyone thinks everything's fine, but you know that it's not fine because what you're doing is you've learned to read your mom's face, right? Subtle things in your mom's face tell an entire emotional story. My mom and I can have conversations with her face. Like I could literally just sit with her for like 30 minutes and like drink tea or whatever. And like, we're not talking, but we're talking. Or let's say we hear something and then it's just, you know what I mean? Have you had those non-verbal, like almost conversations with your parents or your siblings or your significant others? So our faces tell a story. It's an emotional story. And that's what surveillance capitalism wants to hack. It wants to get you, because you know what happens when your mom has a certain face, you're going to act a certain way, right? Like let's say, Oscar, you're out really late, okay? And maybe you hear the timbre of your mother's voice on the phone. Or she FaceTimes you and shows you her face. The moment you see that, it's almost an involuntary reaction. My point is that involuntary reaction is what surveillance capitalism calls a guaranteed outcome. So if we can prompt you to react at a level of a precise emotion, we can effectively control you and we can behaviorally modify you, not just to buy products, but to vote a certain way, to marry the right kind of person, to have the right kind of job, to go to the right kind of school, and the right being whatever the app decides for you, the business decides for you. Hence the right to sanctuary. That's what she's all about. So every time you open your phone, your face is read, and that is stored. And here's the basic question. Don't you think you should have a right to keep your own smile? Right now, you don't have that right. Even though you assume that no one can take it from you, it's being taken from you 2,000 times a day, Fiona, for example. And you're letting it happen. And every time you do that, you're easier to read. And when you plug in the biometric data, it's over. This is not something you can fight against. It's literally like the conquistadors. There's a technological difference that you will never make up. It doesn't matter how brave of a warrior you are. Your civilization is dead. That's what we're looking at. It's the same moment. And what you're doing, if you're not aware of it, is you're naively embracing the conquistador at the door, in your pocket, I should say. The conquistador that's just waiting in your pocket. So you gotta be aware that this is the battle of the 21st century. And if you don't fight this battle, first of all, I don't know if we can win it, just to be direct. I don't think she knows if we can win it either. But you got to at least be aware of it. In theory, I'm not saying that this is actually the case. Remember Lewis Lapham said we don't live in a democracy? In theory, this is a democracy. And if that's true, then we can make the laws that force companies to play by the rules such that we have a right to sanctuary and they don't have the right to steal your smile every time you open your phone with your face. At the moment, that regulation is not in place. For sure it's not in place in China. For sure it's not in place in Canada. 100% for sure it's not in place in America. In the European Union, they're trying to put it in place. And to be fair, there's a handful of countries that are really taking this issue seriously. The Netherlands is one. Germany is another one. Denmark is another one. But that's basically it. Everyone else is embracing the conquistador. Yeah.
I think it's been normalized now because in the iPhone update,
Yep.
have you noticed a little like green or red glow
Mhm.
by your camera?
Mhm,
That
mhm, mhm.
essentially tells you when it's green, when it's recording and it's like using the audio and everything and the camera to like store data.
It's super creepy. It's super creepy. Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about, but it's the point is what to do about it. And this is not, you see the difference in our classes here. Okay, I couldn't care less about memorizing a test. What I'm trying to do here is present something that I hope transforms you, okay, and inspires you to take part in this battle, which is a very personal battle. You have to fight this thing, Celine, Fiona, digital community, Louis, Oscar, Arthas, myself. And if I don't, trouble. Trouble in the sense that I could be modified to behave in a way that that first of all doesn't serve my interest. It's determined by someone else. And in a way that makes me a stranger to myself. You could argue we're already kind of flirting with that.
Yeah.
Right? Because think about there's nothing normal about 21st century consumer lifestyle, convenience lifestyle. That's been programmed into you. Okay, just so you understand. And if you think I'm wrong, talk to your grandparents. They'll smack you upside the head when they see how you spend money, for example. Right? It's for the grandparents' generation, it's an insult. My mom tells this story. My goodness, I don't know how to explain this to you because it's also a little bit of a cultural thing. But there is this lady. My mom is a philologist. She speaks 7 different languages, believe it or not. And one of her languages is Russian. She learned Russian from. She went to this academy, and as a young girl, went through that and had a transformative experience with this teacher. And her teacher, her Russian language teacher, and I believe that she studied Russian poetry with this lady. She was a survivor of the Battle of Stalingrad, this lady. She was a very little girl when this had happened. And she saw, if you know anything about the Battle of Stalingrad, that's the battle where the Nazis were stopped for the first time. And from the Stalingrad forward is when the Blitzkrieg is reversed. The Russians did that. It took 1 million people. It's unspeakable horror. What ensues after the Battle of Stalingrad for the survivors, if you survived, and this little girl who later becomes a teacher is one of the survivors, is mass famine. Mass famine. So we're talking about winter, no food, people literally eating shoe leather and tree bark. That's what we're talking about. From the Chinese perspective, you know about famine, right? So this lady sees one of my mom's schoolmates throw away a sandwich. Her mother had prepared something, she ate it, and she's like, oh, I don't like this. And she threw it out in the trash. And this lady, upon seeing this little scene, and my mom remembers it like it was yesterday, went off on her. I can't reproduce this. My mom has a certain way of doing it, but you get the point. Right? How we're living our life right now, most of us, is basically thoughtless consumption. It's an embarrassment. And it's hard to see because we're inside of it. But, talk to your grandparents. see how they see you and your behaviors. And my point is that it's not your fault necessarily. Part of it is engineering, right? Because you turn on the TV, you open your phone. So this is not an exchange value where you get a piece. It's sold not on your behalf, it's sold in spite what you want or what you care about. And the profits derived from that sale go directly to the seller, i.e. the thief, Google Corporation, and the buyer, the business that has the predictive product and is going to make money. So you're left out of the equation. And that's where most of the money was made in the last 2 years during COVID, just so you understand. So while people are starving, and like we're in Vancouver, and this is a place of ridiculous abundance. It's a bizarre bubble that we live inside, but let's take advantage of it. Namely, we have the time and the rare opportunity to see these things with precision. So the thief, Google, makes money. The business that bought the predictive product from Google makes money. Meanwhile, you're the fossil fuel. You're the raw material. And that's what surveillance capitalism actually is. This transaction is instantiated when you use your smart devices. In other words, you paid for the phone, you allowed your data to be stolen, and then the company that stole it, the one you bought your phone from, gets an additional profit from your lived experience for as long as you live and as long as you use the phone/app. What do you get? Behavioral modification. That's what you get. So you give them fossil fuels, effectively, if you want to think about it in 20th century ways. You are the fossil fuel. What you get back is engineered behavioral modification. They will change you into not only the perfect consumer, because frankly, we've done a pretty good job of making people into consumers. Look at China in the last 30 years. So we're pretty good at getting people to behave like consumers and to succumb to their animalistic instincts, to get back to what we discussed last week. But behavioral modification is a further step, okay? And this is happening all over the world. In America, it's called surveillance capitalism. In China, you can call it the surveillance state. All of this will help you fight the battle, by the way, just so you know, the surveillance capitalism battle. Final statement here, and then we'll move into the article. For Zuboff, the critical social context of our time, just as division of labor and inequality shaped the 19th and 20th centuries, so epistemic inequality, for the purposes of your notes, shapes the 21st century. Let's put it this way, epistemic inequality, for the purposes of today, it's not just about income inequality, it's about the asymmetry in knowledge and power that you're experiencing every time you use a device. It's more than you are in certain ways. Because, as we said, it can remember in a way that you can't. And it can modify you in ways that you can't maybe modify yourself.